Okay. Hi, my hummingbird cohort. This is Belinda Marks, and this is my neurobiology final research paper. And let me start by screen sharing. Cross your fingers. And here we go. Okay, the name of my paper is Spacing Variation Between Mini Columns, How This Presents in Autism and in Dyslexia. So perhaps our unique thoughts are the result of the unique architecture of our brains. Perhaps our neurological infrastructure has a slight variation, like our fingerprints, causing a slight alteration in our wiring and hence a variation in our very thought patterns. So I'm looking into neurological infrastructures, and I'm going to be examining the theory of neurodiversity and its subsequent effects on cognitive and behavioral abilities. Specifically, I'm looking into a theory about spacing between the mini columns in the cerebral cortex, and that this spacing of the mini columns actually falls on a bell curve. The findings of this theory is that it falls on a bell curve, and in the apex of the bell curve is neurotypical or atypical, learning brain functioning. And at either extreme end of this bell curve, you find at one extreme end, you find autism, where the mini columns are more closely spaced together. They're tightly packed together, more densely. And on the opposite end of the bell curve, at the other extreme, is dyslexia, where they find the mini columns are actually further apart. They're spaced further apart from one another, which results in the synaptic wiring between the mini columns is actually longer on the dyslexic makeup of the neuro cortex. Let's see, let me explain this further. So first of all, I want to explain who came up with this theory in the first place. So Dr. Manuel Casanova is a psychiatrist, a neurologist, and a neuropathologist. And he's the one that first recognizes brain differences. He specializes in autism. And he discovered this variation in the spacing of these mini columns. So this is an illustration that was done by actually one of his students, did this illustration to try to communicate this idea that on the left, we have the autistic brain structure with, because the mini columns have less space between them, they're more densely packed, they, and as a result, have a shorter synaptic wiring between them. So that's sort of illustrated on the left, whereas on the right, again, opposite extreme end of that bell curve has dyslexia with the more broadly spaced mini columns and subsequently longer axiom wiring. So let's see. It has other implications as well. For example, it impacts the glial window, that because there's the size of the axon, apparently the further the dyslexic brain structure with the mini columns further apart and the longer synapses are also larger synapses. So this has implications on the white matter, that if there's less columns and there's more white matter, and in case of autism, there's actually more columns, so less glial window spacing, less long range connectivity, more short range or local connectivity, and on the dyslexic brain, it would be less local connectivity and more global connectivity. So let's see what Mini columns. What are mini columns and where are they located? First of all, they're located in the cerebral cortex. And what is the cerebral cortex? That is, it is a thin sheet of cells that coat most of the brain's surface. So within that sheet of cells are the mini columns, are the neurons that make up that sheet. And if you go deeper, more microscopic, you'll see one individual mini column on the far right. Let's see. So this is a slide, a microscopic slide of the actual mini column or the neural structure from the cortex. And as you can see, they're organized into columns, vertical columns. And let's see, I'm going to back up a little bit. I'm going to read a really good definition that I found. So the cell of the cortex are organized into functional units called mini columns. Columns because they are vertically arranged, and mini because they are microscopic in size. And as you can see in this page here, the section of the control subject, you can see they've drawn lines to show that vertical organization. And you can see the spacing between the lines. And then if you look at the lower sampling, what they do is they take a tissue sampling and they apply dye so that you can see the cells more clearly. And the lower one, you can see they are more tightly packed together. Okay. So here's another example of the cerebral cortex and the neurons that make up that cerebral cortex. And then you can see that vertical structure and then the individual neuron or mini column. Okay, so cognitive styles. So his theory, this is where his theory really comes in, is that Dr. Casanova looked at the cognitive styles of autism and dyslexia and attributed them to this neural structural organization. So with autism, there's more of a bottom-up cognitive style of thinking, which tends to be very detail-oriented. It's with a superior attention to detail. They're skilled at sorting and distinguishing between closely related things. They can extract fine features of things. I attribute it to the metaphor I use is seeing the tree rather than the forest. Whereas dyslexia has certain cognitive styles that are associated with it, which mainly being like a top-down kind of a style of thinking, very big picture thinking. They tend to be more holistically oriented, broadly, and good synthesizers, meaning they really can take a lot of disparate ideas and see the connections. Let's see. Whereas they are weaker at fine detail. So that's what causes some of the deficiencies in word recognition and phonological awareness. So they tend to be less efficient at decoding written language, but the comprehension is higher usually. Strings. They make broader connections. So my metaphor for that would be more seeing the forest through the trees. Let's see, again, dyslexia are excellent at big picture thinking, problem solving, recognizing patterns and connections between seemingly disparate things. Okay, so now I kind of want to talk more about where I came up with this idea in the first place and why I chose this topic, actually. I came upon it originally in The Dyslexic Advantage by Edie and Edie. And this was several years ago that I read this book, and I really distinctively remember reading this part about the mini columns, talking about, they use the metaphor of telephone poles. They talked about how, your typical thinker has these telephone poles that are, let's say, for example, 5 feet apart, with the synaptic wiring would be considered like the wires that run on telephone poles, where dyslexics, have a more broad, like, let's say, 10 feet apart. So you have these much longer connections. And I just so distinctively remembered that metaphor that they had given me, that uh, that I just always wondered about that. So I thought when we had to do this project that I would use this as an opportunity to dive a little deeper into this theory and see if it's true. It is a theory, and it's not disproven. Let's say that. I think where there's skepticism around it is that where he makes the leap, it's sort of like a clinical intuition rather than scientifically proven, that these cognitive styles, like the big picture thinking and dyslexia versus, bottom up thinking in autism, he makes the leap that he's saying it's because of this brain structure that they think this way. So, although I have to say it's a compelling narrative, it really, and it's a persuasive narrative, but it's an unproven narrative. So, and I don't think that there's really enough way to, I don't think that we have enough information in understanding our brain to pathologize those behaviors with brain structure. And then that is my presentation. I just want to say one more thing. This image of these telephone poles is why I chose it, is it's not in the reference slide because it's a piece of art that my son created. My son has dyslexia, and he is a brilliant, in my opinion, artist. Okay, that's my final presentation. Thanks. Okay, now I have to figure out how to stop. Okay, end.